Well folks, just when you thought it was safe to look at the business news again, guess what? Tariffs are back. Yes, those delightful economic tools that are apparently President Trump's answer to, well, everything. It's like that one song he just can't get out of his head, except instead of a catchy tune, it's a complex web of international trade restrictions that make everyone's head spin. And just recently, this whole saga took another dramatic turn, careening through the US court system like a runaway shopping cart in a hurricane. So buckle up because we're about to dive into the latest episode of America's favorite trade drama. You might remember Trump's first term. Tariffs here, tariffs there, tariffs pretty much everywhere. It was his signature move, like a chef who only knows how to make one dish, and that dish is a giant, confusing tariff salad. Now, since his grand return to the presidency in January 2025, he's been eager to pick up right where he left off. His goal, as ever, seems to be redrawing America's trade relationships, using tariffs as his primary, and let's be honest, rather blunt, instrument. Let's talk about these specific tariffs, the ones causing all the current fuss. Back in April 2025, President Trump unveiled what some have dubbed his Liberation Day tariffs. Sounds grand, doesn't it? Like a national holiday, but instead of fireworks, you get higher prices on imported goods. These weren't just a few targeted duties. Oh no, that would be far too simple. These were sweeping, broad-based tariffs slapped on most of America's trading partners. It was a bold move, a go big or go home strategy for international trade if going big means potentially alienating everyone. The baseline for these new tariffs was set at a cool 10%, just a little something extra on almost everything coming into the country. But wait, there's more. For certain economies, the levies were even steeper. The administration's stated aim, as usual, was to protect American industries and jobs, and to force other countries into what Trump deems fairer trade deals. Whether this approach actually achieves those goals is, to put it mildly, a subject of rather intense debate among people who understand economics. Just as these new tariffs were settling in, creating their own special brand of economic chaos, the U.S. Court of International Trade decided to throw a rather large wrench in the works. On Thursday, May 29, 2025, the court delivered a fairly stunning ruling. It found that President Trump had, and I'm paraphrasing here, gone a bit too far. Specifically, the court determined that the president had exceeded his authority in imposing these sweeping duties. Boom! Just like that, the tariffs were ordered to be immediately blocked. For a moment, it looked like a major blow to Trump's trade agenda. The core of the court's reasoning was pretty fundamental. It basically came down to a little document you might have heard of, the U.S. Constitution. The judges pointed out that the Constitution grants Congress, not the president, the power to levy taxes and tariffs. Fancy that. It's one of those separation of powers things that they teach in school, often right before the part about how a bill becomes a law. The court essentially said, "Hey, Mr. President, that's not really your job." It was a clear message about the limits of executive power, especially when it comes to hitting other countries with import taxes. So, what was the legal magic wand the Trump administration thought it could wave to justify these tariffs? It's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a catchy little number from 1977. The administration argued that this act gave the president the authority to impose these tariffs in response to, well, an emergency. The nature of that emergency, particularly for the broad Liberation Day tariffs, seemed a bit vague, but hey, emergency is a flexible word, right? Especially when you're trying to reshape global trade. However, the Court of International Trade took a closer look at IEEPA and was, shall we say, unimpressed with the administration's interpretation. The judges ruled that Trump had indeed overstepped his authority by invoking this act. They stated quite clearly that IEEPA does not confer unbounded authority for such tariffs. Section 5, Not So Fast, Appeals Court hits the replay button. Just when businesses were starting to dream of a world without these new tariffs, and perhaps even calculating potential refunds, the legal drama took another sharp turn. On Friday, May 30, 2025, a mere day after the Court of International Trade's bold ruling, a higher court stepped into the ring. The United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit in Washington decided to press the pause button. Or rather, they pressed the unpause button on the tariffs. Yes, you heard that right. The tariffs were back on, temporarily at least. In a move that added another layer of confusion to the whole affair, The appeals court provided no opinion or reasoning for its order. It simply issued a stay, effectively blocking the lower court's decision to block the tariffs. So, the tariffs that were off were now on again, all without a clear explanation from the appellate judges. It's like a referee reversing a call in a game but refusing to say why. This left everyone, from importers to international partners, scratching their heads and wondering what exactly was going on. The legal roller coaster had just hit another unexpected loop. Section 6. How's the world taking it? Spoiler: not great. Now let's take a quick trip around the globe to see how America's trading partners are reacting to this ongoing tariff saga. First up, China. Beijing's response to the initial trade court ruling was swift and predictable. They urged the United States to fully cancel the wrongful unilateral tariff measures. They also advised Washington to heed both international and domestic voices calling for an end to these trade disruptions. China, having been hit with additional tariffs of up to 145% at one point before some temporary reductions for negotiations, has a lot at stake. They're clearly hoping this legal challenge eventually sticks. Moving over to our northern neighbor, Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney initially welcomed the U.S. Court of International Trade's decision to block the tariffs. That's hardly surprising given that Canadian goods were among those targeted, partly under that questionable fentanyl pretext. However, Carney also sounded a note of caution, warning that trade ties remain profoundly and adversely threatened. He pointed to the remaining sector-specific levies, like those on steel and aluminum, which weren't affected by this particular ruling, and the general atmosphere of trade hostility. Section 7. Market madness. Following the money and tariff turmoil. Unsurprisingly, all this legal back and forth has sent financial markets on a bit of a bumpy ride. When the U.S. Court of International Trade first announced it was blocking Trump's new tariffs, there was an initial wave of optimism. Asian markets, for instance, rallied on the news. It seemed like a major hurdle to global trade might be removed, or at least lowered. Investors, for a moment, dared to hope that perhaps the era of escalating trade wars was drawing to a close. Ah, sweet, fleeting optimism, how quickly it fades. However, that initial burst of enthusiasm was soon tempered, as the realization sank in that the trade court's decision was likely to be appealed, and that the legal battle could drag on for months, if not years. The markets became more cautious. U.S. stock indexes were mixed, and European markets actually closed slightly down. The gains from the initial positive reaction were limited. It was a classic case of buy the rumor, sell the news, or perhaps more accurately, buy the initial ruling, then get nervous about the inevitable appeal. Section 8. What's next, Donnie? Trump's Playbook post-ruling. The White House reaction to the initial Court of International Trade ruling was, shall we say, characteristically restrained. Just kidding. They called the decision blatantly wrong and a major setback to President Trump's trade strategy. President Trump himself, never one to shy away from criticizing the judiciary, reportedly labeled the ruling horrible and even country-threatening. This is pretty standard operating procedure. If a court rules against him, it's the court that's wrong, not the policy. They did express confidence, however, that the decision would be overturned on appeal, a confidence that was, at least temporarily, validated. So what's the administration's game plan now that the tariffs are back on, pending further legal review? White House trade advisor Peter Navarro, a longtime tariff enthusiast, made it clear that U.S. tariffs would remain in place for now. He also stated that if the administration ultimately loses these court fights, they will simply seek to enact tariffs through other means. Section 9. Conclusion. So, are we stuck on this tariff merry-go-round forever? As we've seen, this latest tariff drama is a complex beast, full of legal twists, economic jitters, and international grumbling. The immediate future of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs hangs in the balance, awaiting further decisions from the appeals court. And as many analysts suggest, this case, or parts of it, could very well wind its way up to the Supreme Court. So, if you were hoping for a quick resolution, I'm afraid you're likely to be disappointed. This legal battle has all the hallmarks of a long, drawn-out affair. Think of it as a season of a particularly convoluted legal drama, but with actual global economic consequences. Even if the courts ultimately rule against the administration on the use of IEEPA for these specific tariffs, it's unlikely to mark the end of President Trump's tariff ambitions. As his advisors have already indicated, they have other legal avenues they are willing to explore. Trump could try to use different sections of U.S. trade law, or he might even seek explicit congressional approval for his tariff plans, though that could be a tougher sell depending on the political climate. The point is, his commitment to using tariffs as a primary tool of economic policy seems unwavering. Like and subscribe to Smartobrains for more engaging deep dives into sociology, economics, and social policy.